I'm Dot Maver, President of the National Peace Academy in the United States of America. Welcome to the Inamori International Center for Ethics and Excellence, the Peace and War Summit, here at Case Western Reserve University. Our panel is titled Children of Peace and War, From Child Soldiers to Peace Education. We're going to use a question and dialogue format that has been in use throughout the week, and it will begin with the panelists. However, I want to say it includes all of us. And I also want to say that you are in for a treat this afternoon, as you will hear from panelists, many of whom have worked with or have been child soldiers. So we're all in this together. And I want to remind us of the purpose and the opportunity of this unique and historic summit. It is a week-long event that will transform how we respond to, engage in, and recover from conflict. And might I submit, there is a significant difference between violence and conflict, and many panelists throughout the week have addressed this. It's our responsibility to learn to deal with conflict wisely and responsibly before it escalates to violence. And in the words of Dr. Shannon French, the director of the Inamori Center here at Case Western, at this Peace and War Summit, we will address the greatest challenge that faces humanity, the pursuit of a just and lasting peace. At the National Peace Academy, we are defining peace taken right from the Earth Charter. And simply put, that means living in right relationship with self, others, and the world around us. Let me introduce the panelists. I will begin to my immediate right, your immediate left of me, with Eric Howell, who is a writer and director. And we just screened Eric's film, short narrative, Anna's Playground. He's been involved in film and television production for over 20 years. He's thoroughly experienced every aspect of motion picture production, in fact. Joined the Screen Actors Guild in 1992 as a stuntman and actor. And that experience propelled Eric into stunt coordination and directing. His feature credits include North Country, Joe Somebody, A Simple Plan, A Serious Man, and many others. Eric has directed several award-winning short films, and his latest film that we just screened, Anna's Playground, recently won the Cleveland International Film Festival, has won top honors at 15 international film festivals and 4 Academy Award qualifiers. It is all about how war impacts the humanity of our children. Therese Cole-McCory. Therese is a renowned author, essayist, jurist, and advocate for women's and children's rights throughout Africa. She is a pioneer of African literature, as her novel, Essential Encounters, is recognized as the first novel written by a female author from sub-Saharan Africa. Other major publications include Les Couples Dominos, one of the first sociological essays to analyze biracial couples, and her novella, Colors of Tears, published in 2006 in the Northwest Review. She also served as president of the Union of African and Malagasy Women and as advisor to African governments on the status of women. Dr. Guibert Doho is Associate Professor of French and Francophone Studies in the Department of Modern Languages and Literature and founding director of the Ethnic Studies program at Case Western Reserve University. He received his doctorate at the University of Sorbonne Nouvelle and has taught at the University of Yaoundé, Cameroon, and State University of New York at Albany. Among his fiction and critical essays are The Skull, Beyond the Lily's Lake, and People Theater and Grassroots Empowerment in Cameroon. And might I share, Guibert, that the story you will share is part of it.
Wow.
Part of the story is as a child soldier in Cameroon.
Trouble follows you everywhere.
Kimmy Weeks has worked to alleviate poverty and human suffering in Africa and around the world since he was 14 years old. Kimmy was born in Liberia in 1981, and when he was 9, he came face to face with civil war, human suffering, and death. Over the years, Kimmy has formed partnerships and led organizations that have provided education to thousands of students in West Africa. He lobbied the disarmament of over 20,000 child soldiers and provided health care and recreation supplies to children. He'll be sharing his story, but I want you to know that he investigated and released a groundbreaking report on the Liberian government's involvement in the training of children as soldiers. And as a result, the former Liberian president, Charles Taylor, made attempts to assassinate him until he fled Liberia and was granted political asylum in the United States. When he came to the States, Kimmy established an international organization called Youth Action International, supporting the needs of families living in post-war countries. And in 2008, YAI's programs benefited close to 150,000 people in 6 post-war African countries. He's the recipient of the 2007 Golden Brick Award, honoring young people under 25 who are working to change the world. And in 2007, Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf presented Kimmy with Liberia's highest honor, decorating him Knight Grand Commander in the Humane Order of African Redemption. He is the youngest recipient of this honor. A fun fact, his photo and bio profiled on 20 million bags of Cool Ranch Doritos. I mean, I love that, Kimmy. Kimmy and I were interviewed together in Vermont many years ago now for the International Day of Peace. Manish Thapa is an assistant professor of peace studies in the Department of Conflict, Peace, and Development Studies at Dubuque University, which he helped to establish in 2007. He is a doctoral research candidate in international studies at the University of Tokyo, where his research focuses on From Bullet to Ballot, the Politics of Peacemaking in Nepal. A recipient of the Robert McNamara Fellowship from the World Bank and many other fellowships. He is a founding executive director of the Asian Study Center for Peace and Conflict Transformation, ASPECT. He is one of the founding members of the Global Alliance for Ministries and Departments of Peace. And in 2005, Manish founded the Nepal Peace Initiative Alliance, which was instrumental in the establishment of the Ministry of Peace and Reconstruction in Nepal in the new government. He is also co-chair of the Internal Conflicts Commission at the International Peace Research Association. Manish has worked in South Asia, Afghanistan, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, focusing on peace education with UNICEF Save the Children. Professor Roger Cram is an adjunct faculty member and director of special projects at Hiram College in Hiram, Ohio. He developed and teaches courses based on his years of research into the problem-solving abilities of world heroes of peace. 3 of Roger's courses at Hiram College are Children of the Dump, Diversity Through Debate, and Human Trafficking. They offer the heroes of peace remarkable conflict resolution skills and methodologies for peaceful crisis management. In 2007, he took 14 Hiram College students to Nicaragua to work with the children living on the city dump of Chinandega, and to South Africa working with children with AIDS, and has presented some of his findings at the Rotary World Peace Summit held in Windsor, Ontario. That was in April '08, and has presented workshops to the Department of Defense and United States Air Force. He has also appeared in People magazine and on Good Morning America, CNN, and the Discovery Channel.
Not Doritos.
But he's not on any Dorito bags. Correct. Yet. So we'd like to take a moment, all of us, the panelists and myself, and invite you to listen with all of us as each of these panelists is about to share from the initial question that will be posed here, but in fact, they each have such unique and deep and moving and educational stories to share with us that I've invited them to tell their story, to open the panel through the context of this question. What can we learn from this challenge we face regarding child soldiers about how we educate for peace? So, how would you like to set the context as we begin focusing through the lens of what can we learn from this challenge we face regarding child soldiers about how we educate for peace? And I invite all of you to listen and note as these esteemed panelists with deep stories share, what are the gems that relate to peace education that are going to help us create a world that actually works for everyone? So we are all participating as you set context around what can we learn from this challenge we face regarding child soldiers about how we educate for peace. And I will ask who would like to start, and it will put pressure on the person to your right. Professor Cram.
I'm sure everybody in this room wants to help others and help children and educate the world and promote peace. That's not the issue. The issue is how. And about 15 years ago at Hiram College, I was faced with the same question as I'm teaching courses to students. How do we make a difference? Don't just tell me about the problems in the world. Tell me what can be done. Well, I didn't know how. But I decided to study and start up a research project on people around the world that have proven that they know how. Magnificent people at their best. What were their thoughts? What resolutions did they use? What values did they employ in their decisions? And I thought from here, maybe I could get some help. Some of the people we analyzed were obviously Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Gandhi, Eleanor Roosevelt, Booker T. Washington, Dr. Martin Luther King, William Wilberforce, Albert Schweitzer, Janetta Sagan. I mean, the list goes on and on. We only researched heroes that had solved their problems peacefully. No military heroes that killed more of the enemy than the enemy killed of them. But we did research peaceful military heroes. By the time we were through, we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of solutions that these different people had performed to resolve their conflict. What we didn't expect is when we started putting them into groups. There are only 14. Out of all the hundreds and probably thousands of ways to solve a problem peacefully when magnificent people were at their best. Now, Nelson Mandela had a bad day. We didn't research him then. We researched him at his best. And we're absolutely amazed at what we found, and we tried to employ these 14 values into resolving issues and problems for the people around Hiram College. They worked so magnificently, we started studying children heroes. Children heroes? Let me give you an example. A little boy named Ryan. He's 7 years old. He's in kindergarten. His teacher comes to him and says, you know, there's people in Africa, in little villages, that don't have any water. We need to start to raise money. Maybe we can raise $70 by vacuuming rugs and washing dishes for your parents. Well, Ryan thought the well cost $70. And he went home and told his mother, I've got to raise money. I've got to raise money to raise $70 so I can put a water well in Africa. And his mother, being very wise, allowed him to do this. And he raked leaves and shoveled the driveway and washed dishes and vacuumed rugs for 7 or 8 months. Now he has $70, but now he's in the first grade. And he took the $70 back with his mother to his kindergarten teacher and very proudly held it up and said, here's $70, now you can put the water well in and help those children in Africa. And the teacher looked down at him and said, oh, Ryan, water wells cost thousands of dollars. And he looked up at the teacher and he looked at his mother. And then he said, I'll just have to work harder. And he did. And he went to every first grade class in the entire school system and told the kids to go vacuum and rake leaves and wash dishes. And in 2 years, he had the thousands of dollars, and he sent it over to Africa. But he wanted to see his well that he had put in. Now he's 9. He went to the newspapers and asked for help to raise enough money so he and his mother could go see the water well. And within a year, he had the money, and the village in Ghana heard he was coming. And there's a little dirt road leading into this town. And as they drove the truck into the town, for over a mile, both sides of the road were lined with kids from that village, clapping him as he came in for the whole mile. Now this kid's 9 years old. Now he's 18. He's put in over 365 water wells in 54 different countries. Now you know why I research children. And now you know what the values that they used were the same as all of the heroes. And the values that he emphasized were the ones I found on perseverance. You never give up. Most perceived failures in your life are not failures at all. They're successfully completed stepping stones toward a goal. Let our kids know this. They don't fail when they fail a test. They don't fail when they fail a class. Just keep going. Some people finish in 50 steps. Some people finish in 100 steps. And just one more minute, and then I want to hog your time. But a classic example of this is Thomas Edison. When he was working on the light bulb, he spent time on 1,384 filaments. The little part that glows, none of them worked. He was the laughing stock of the scientific community. Who could ever think of creating an electric light? And as he walked down the street, people laughed at him, and he was written up in scientific journals as a buffoon. But the 1,385th filament worked, and he became a hero. And during a great celebration in his honor, a cub reporter came up to him and said, Thomas Edison, how does it feel to have failed 1,384 times? And he quickly answered, I never failed once. Creating the electric light was a 1,385-step process. And that's how we need to look at the steps it needs to take to get going. And the children of the world are my heroes, and they're doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. I trust you are listening not only through your ears and your concrete mind, but through your heart, and that you're taking in some of these values. And you actually named them, Roger, a number of them, but I just want to say cooperation, empathy, responsibility. What else did you hear? And you don't have to yell it out, but what else did you hear? Perseverance was named by Roger. Responsibility. As we are able to name these and inculcate them through our education and in our culture, we learn to live together in a just and peaceful society. Now, I did say to the right, which actually brings us full around the circle, Eric.
Is that how that works?
I think so.
How to educate. I came into this by this subject found me. I didn't find it. I come to you as a filmmaker, and the beauty of being a filmmaker is that I don't have to answer any questions. I just have to ask them. And there's a whole panel here of people who know how to answer them. So for me, the key to how to... Is it? Oh, it's just muted.
Oh, there you go.
How's that?
Thank you, Wes.
I don't have to repeat that, do I? So for me, I came to this, I started with a writing experiment and then discovered that 2,000 kids are killed or injured in war every day, war-related violence every day, not to include gang violence and everything else that's going on in the world. And what I realized with my story, with my short film Anna's Playground, was that I had a tool that could be used. Rather than creating a nonprofit, I had a tool that could be used. And that tool does something very specific, I think and hope, to educate about this subject. And my approach as a filmmaker is through the heart, not through the head. And I think being in an environment, a learning environment, is very interesting because my film is not fact. It is not a documentary about a specific conflict. In fact, it's absolutely contrary to that. It's fiction. It's the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I think that's what I want to bring to the table and how I want to educate with what I'm doing is to create empathy. It's easy for us to watch and hear stories about what's going on in all of these different areas, and it's easy to put our head around that. But my hope is to put people's heart around the humanity of children, no matter what the political situation or the context of the situation. That it's about creating empathy and connection with those of us who are blessed to live in this country. While we are surrounded by violence, we are extremely fortunate to live in Club America, and it's very difficult to sometimes get past the head and into the heart to reach out. Everyone in this room is an easy audience because you're all well versed in it, and I think so reaching people who are maybe not as well versed is how I see connecting an audience to how they're affected by children living in violence. And I was, during my process of actually shooting the film, we shot the film in Minneapolis, in the largest Somali community in the world outside of Mogadishu. And I have two quick anecdotes that show directly how being in Minneapolis, how we are connected to the violence that's going on in the world. And one of them is, in the film, there's an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade prop. And my production designer was going up the elevator with a Somali gentleman about 25 years old. And his immediate response is that real? Because it looks very realistic. And he assured them that it was not. And he said, that looks just like the one I used to shoot people with when I was a boy. And that was a very frightening story, and it was amazing to have this man share his story with us. But then it got even more personal. After 3 days of shooting, my translator had not been on set. We had a translator to connect, to liaise with the local community. And as we were filming, he came up on the third day crying and apologizing to me for not being there. And of course I was upset because I'm the director. Everyone's supposed to revolve around me. And I was taught a very quick lesson. And he apologized because his 16-year-old nephew had been recruited and taken from the Minneapolis neighborhood along with 24 other Somali youth and brought over to Mogadishu to fight in the Civil War. And he was dead 2 weeks later. And basically, I think most of those kids are now dead. And this is right here in Middle America, where we are being affected directly by what's going on, not just inside our inner cities and the violence going on there, but by every kid living in violence around the world. So my hope is to educate through the heart with empathy, rather than statistics and I guess through love, through the heart,
Yes.
is really what my
Thank you.
my approach is.
Thank you, Eric. And as you share that, I'm mindful, for those of you who were at the panel earlier today, so many of the professors and military leaders on the panel, researchers this morning, mentioned education as a key to a just and sustainable peace. So thank you. Therese?
Quand j'écoute, vous allez traduire s'il vous plaît.
Merci.
Quand j'écoute tout ce que ces messieurs viennent de dire, je suis obligée d'être un petit peu confuse parce que mon expérience est bien plus petite. Je voudrais simplement rappeler.
Excuse me, will you translate for us?
Yeah, when I listen to what everybody is saying, and I'm a little bit confused because my personal experience seemed to be a little bit different.
Bien. Mon expérience est liée à mon pays.
I can only link my experience to my country.
Et le reste, je l'ai lu, j'ai compati pour tout ce qui s'est passé en Afrique récemment. Et deuxièmement, j'ai pu rencontrer parfois, soit dans mes activités, soit à travers la télévision et aussi des contacts, des enfants soldats.
As far as other countries are concerned, all over Africa, I had to read and rely on what I see, documentary, and so on and so forth.
Mais avant de parler de ce qui se passe ailleurs, je retourne dans mon pays pour dire ceci. Nous avons connu un grand conflit. Nous avions connu du temps de la colonisation des guerres, mais puisque, par exemple, dans ma propre famille, il y a des gens qui ont combattu, y compris sur le terrain camerounais.
Guibert?
Coming back to Cameroon,
Yeah.
on va aller plus.
Yeah. We're taking it in through our hearts, and
Coming
we'd like
back
to
to
be able to understand too.
Cameroon, I must say Cameroon has gone through a number of conflicts, colonial conflicts, and
Les conflits maintenant.
even now, I cannot say that Cameroon is not at war at the moment.
Yes. En 1945, on a eu un grand soulèvement qui était comme une guerre civile.
In 1945, we had the first social of civil. 1945, it was almost as a civil war.
Alors que ça devait être un soulèvement syndical.
It was trade union asking for their rights.
Et lorsque les jeunes combattants ont commencé à fuir parce qu'eux étaient armés simplement avec des bâtons, eh bien, on a commencé à tirer sur eux.
Well, they were facing the French colonial army, but they didn't have any weapon. They simply had branches and crops. And when they started running away, the military started shooting at them.
Et lorsque les enfants et les femmes sont allés se réfugier dans les églises, parfois ils ont trouvé des prêtres armés.
Women and children then ran to the only and sure refuge that can be. That's the church. But what happened is when they went into the church, they were faced with another gun. This time not from the military, but from the priests themselves.
À partir de ce moment-là, j'étais convaincue, moi, que la guerre n'est pas une bonne chose.
From that moment, I became convinced that war is not a good thing.
En 1955, nous avons eu le terrorisme le plus fort qu'il y ait dans notre pays.
10 years after, there was much more organized rebellion, much more organized terrorism, if you want.
Et je n'étais pas au pays, mais j'ai rencontré plusieurs enfants qui sont venus en France, et notamment un jour, à la télévision où je travaillais, un garçon est rentré et qui m'a dit ceci. Depuis, j'ai vu mon père, la tête de mon père, sur un plateau. C'était
Yeah.
c'était
Sorry,
une guerre.
No, yeah.
Oui.
Sorry for stopping a little bit because these are things that touch me also, and I couldn't.
Could not.
No. Okay. She wasn't in Cameroon then. She was in France, and she met when she was in France. Student, of course. Student Cameroonian were going to France to study, and she met a young man who said, "My father's head. I was witness of my father's head cut and exposed." Why it was caused in public places, if you will.
Alors, à partir de ce moment-là, j'ai compris qu'il faut éduquer les enfants contre la guerre.
From that moment again, I become much more convinced that children must be educated against war.
Qu'est-ce qui se passe alors de ce point de vue à l'heure actuelle au Cameroun? C'est que presque toutes les organisations de femmes ont une section pour l'éducation contre la guerre et pour la paix.
What is happening now at the moment is all women organizations in Cameroon at least have taken responsibility of educating children against, empowering them against war.
Notamment dans les organisations religieuses.
Specifically in religious organizations.
Moi-même, j'essaye, partout où il est question et dans mes écrits, d'attirer l'attention sur l'importance que nous, les humains, nous avons à nous éduquer et à éduquer nos enfants contre la guerre et pour la paix.
And every time that I write, every time that I take my pen to write, in my writings, I have it as a responsibility to, write against war and then do as much as possible that my writing are against war.
Cela m'a amené dans mon tout petit roman dont Madame a parlé tout à l'heure, d'avoir un personnage qui s'appelle Zimba, et ce personnage que nous appelons fille des dieux parce que le Cameroun est appelé les chars de Dieu, le char de Dieu, si bien que tous les Camerounais sont les enfants de Dieu, du Dieu païen, le Dieu africain.
So in one of my novel that the coordinator has just talked about, le Dieu.
Le Dieu païen.
Non, le titre du roman.
Rencontre essentielle.
Oh, in Essential Encounter that Professor Tolman translated, there's a character named Zimba.
Zimba. Et Zimba n'a pas pu se marier parce que son mari a été tué par les raids terroristes.
Zimba couldn't get married.
Parce que son fiancé a été tué pendant la guerre.
Yeah, because her fiancé was killed during the war.
Et aussi, j'ai relaté quelque part la vie d'un homme qui est revenu de guerre, justement, et qui était un jeune homme. Je suppose donc qu'il est parti alors qu'il était encore plus jeune, avec une jambe en moins.
In another piece of my writing, I'm talking about one character who went to war but came back, of course, with half foot.
Et je vous assure, quand on est petit et que l'on voit ça, c'est terrible.
These are, these are things that when you are a child, you see somebody with half foot, half hand. These are images that impact the child. You never go away from those memories. You live with those memories.
Alors, je suis très contente de pouvoir témoigner, d'apporter ce petit témoignage qui se résume « Travaillons tous pour la paix ».
So that's what my contribution and my call, my exhortation is that let's together work for peace.
Thank you, Therese. I am mindful as you share, Therese, of something that Betty Reardon has said. And Betty Reardon is considered by many to be the mother of peace education. And she says, aligned with what I feel in my heart as you speak, Therese, the general purpose of peace education, as I understand it, is to promote the development of authentic planetary consciousness that will enable us to function as global citizens and to transform the present human condition by changing social structures and the patterns of thought that have created it. This transformational imperative must be at the center of peace education. That's Betty Reardon. I'm mindful of that through your writing. Thank you. You're there.
It seems trouble follows you almost everywhere. As I say, for 60 years I've said I'm not going to talk about all these problems. Now today I'm forced to do it. It started in New York. Louise Briere, Saint-Gilbert, she just invited me to come and talk to her class. They were reading Johnny Mad Dog. So when I arrived, it was a surprise. They said, okay, talk to you about your life as a child soldier. I was forced to talk. Now today, I am at it again.
And we are grateful.
What are we talking about? In 1955, as Therese has just said, the UPC movement, which is the first political organized movement in Cameroon, was banned. And all the leaders were forced. For those who had connection outside, they were obliged to flee outside the country. And then those who couldn't, they had to take to the what you call maquis. But I'm talking about the term that you don't even pronounce. It's an anathema term in Cameroon. You don't use it, maquis or maquisard. If they call you maquisard in Cameroon, you are a kind of plague, if you want. Now, Maquis started, those who the leaders, after having organized from 1945, as she said, to 1955, organizing the people ideologically, preparing them about, the fact that colonization is not good. Then suddenly they are banned and they are forced to go into Maquis, fighting from hiding. And then at that moment also the French army decided to totally eradicate what was opposition in Cameroon. Now the Bassa people had their own period from 1956 to 1957, and from 1957 it was my own area. The technique was clear. The French army has as a duty to totally eradicate what was then considered as the communist, because UPC was a Marxist inclined movement. So my village, or I hate to use the word village, it's my kingdom. My kingdom was at the center of the UPC movement. We were ideologically formed simply to ask what any human beings need to have. That is, my piece of land is my piece of land. That's what gives me everything. Formal education that we were to have later on, it wasn't generalized. It was just the son of the privileged one who were sent to France to have better education. But the vast majority of us, we were to work our farm. But these farms were occupied by the colonizers. So war was general. and my kingdom were in the heart of it. But unfortunately for me, my father was one of the many kings, in the king doesn't take part in this. The king said, no, I'm not going to choose side, either to go to the Maquis to fight for Maquis or to go to the government. But war, you are not, there's no neutrality in war, and they forced him and pinned a medal, the French, the Prime Minister Aijo pinned a medal on my father. That was in 1958, the night of 1958. I cannot forget that night. And as my father was walking back home, he was singing and say, I have built, let other people eat. He knew he was going to be killed. And that night, the soldiers, or the liberation soldiers, they came and killed my father on the ground that he accepted the medal. He was on the side of the army. But then, the French army in 1958 become, the war generalized. We had bombing all over. The kingdom was totally destroyed. Now, that night, when I went and saw the corpse of my father, he was cut into pieces. When I saw him, well, the Alsos don't cry, but we cry. We cry. And we buried my father. But then, since everything was burned, we had to go on somewhere as kids. You have to flee. And then my other siblings asked me to go to one of the Maquis. When we arrived in the Maquis, I saw all these wonderful men and women. They were dressed in khaki, drilling and singing the song. I sang one of the songs the other day. When I look at it, I say, so we are really at war. If I go to the side of the, there was no way to go to the side of the so-called army, I would be killed. When I go to, this side, I would be killed. I decided to be part of, that Maquis, and we fought. But, that was not just for a short time, and independence came in the 1960s. And since we had the independence, for most of us, war was not more necessary. And then that's where I started having the opportunity to go to school. I'll go quickly. I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one. We are so many of us. In the Maquis, our role was to carry gun, or to carry food, or to carry messages, and so on and so forth, in order for the fight. But as I say, the war ended when France finally gave us our independence in 1960. So I understood the value of education. I got the best education it was a challenge for me. Either I was to stay on my own corner, or to be some of the drop-offs that some of my people dropped off. I never had that. It was a challenge. I educated. I even went to, to Sorbonne, as you just said. But, when you see your fathers, like I said, when you see heads every day exposed for you to see, it doesn't leave you. You live with it. All my years, whether in school or in France or in Cameroon, anger was with me. But you know what? I learned to let my anger go in writing. My first books, I don't like them. I mean, she quote the score. That's the only one. But even that one, I don't even want to quote it. Because I learned to write literature as Molière, Racine, and the rest. And I put all my anger, all my character in the first writing, where dead, I killed them, nobody is living. But then, when I started teaching at the University of Yaoundé, teaching French literature, I see all these youth. None of them knew what was going on. Nobody wanted to talk about it. No, you cannot even talk about it. One day I abandoned my job at the university and decided to educate the local people in the village, to ask them to be able to be proud of themselves, to express their own opinion. That's where I enter in people theater. And then we went educate people on issue of environmental, I thought I was doing something that would probably, then I earned myself problem again, because all what I was saying, teaching local people to stand up tall for their right, it was against the will of the government. As you see, I was forced out of the country, and today I'm in exile. But I'm proud about it, because I went to these villages who for 60 years, some of them never talked. We talked, we learned, I learned from them, and we wrote their stories, series of play. They are actors, they are writers, and I published the first volume of it. What am I doing here? What am I doing at this moment here in the U.S. when we talked of Darfur, we talked of other places, we talked of Cameroon again when there is still a problem? Well, I thank the United States for giving me the opportunity to be here. But we can make a difference. Although I'm here, they still feel me over there. My students know me. Education is not that you put knowledge in your pocket. You educate yourself in order to change your neighbor, to bring peace among your people. That's what I tell my students. You tell your story, but your story should be educated. And some of them are there, they know me. You don't come in my class just to, take knowledge and then you come in my class to create, to tell your own story. And this is exactly what actually I think we should be doing. Let us not silence the stories that are outside there. Let us bring people to talk. When you talk, you are cure, and you may cure other people. Thank you.
It's very good to be here. Every time I now live back in Liberia, and so every time I come back, I forget that America gets very cold. And so I'm walking around without a winter jacket. People must have thought I was a crazy man. But in life, and there's so many things that we forget. I remember being in Liberia, and having malaria used to be like the flu. You got it every year. But the thing with something like malaria is when you're sick, you forget what it feels like to be well. I mean, you just completely forget it. And when you're well, you forget what it is to be sick. And there's so many things in our lives that we forget about. But the issue of war and being in the middle of a war is something that remains forever burned in your memory. Before the Liberian Civil War, we never thought we would experience war. We never thought we would experience bloodshed or human suffering. And even watching it on the television screen, the most graphic war movie really does not put you into what it is to be in the middle of a war. And that's how extreme it is, because obviously the movie cannot convey that sense of fear that you feel in the middle of a war, the smells that you experience of death and disaster, or just the extreme human suffering. And having that experience as a child, being 9 years old, and being thrown in the middle of a war for me, really tore my life apart. In fact, for children, in the middle of a war, it's almost as if you're torn between two worlds. On the one hand, you're trying to hold on to that innocence of being a child, and enjoying what comes with it, and not having to worry about finding food or what you're going to eat, because that's that. I often look back and say that's the joy of being a child. You're not worrying about the light bill, and so you're leaving the light on. You're not worrying about the water. You're not worrying about what the food's going to come from and stuff like that. And that innocence, or playing, which is so essential, that innocence is taken away, and then all of a sudden you go into a war situation where now all the things that children are not supposed to be concerned about is what you're worried about. And in my life at 10 years old, I essentially moved from being a child to obviously being an adult. And so when people ask me, because my first organization started when I was 14, they say, gee, you did incredible things when you were 14. What was I doing when I was 14? I wasn't starting an organization. And I was like, well, our situations were completely different because I had lost that childhood, and thousands of children essentially lose their childhoods. And the difficulty of it is it's something that can never be replaced. There's so many things in our lives that can be replaced, but that idea of losing that childhood can never be replaced. So imagine for a moment, and I wasn't used as a child soldier, but imagine for a moment, though I wasn't used, my life was extreme, and the situation I went through was extreme. So just imagine for a moment the child who's forced to fight and the child who's forced to kill. These are young children who are forced from their families, or in some cases, these were young children who decided to enter the war because they felt either it was a way to provide for themselves or to fight or to take revenge for something that had happened to them. But that journey into being a child soldier, that journey into fighting, imagine for a moment the youngest person who fought in the Liberian Civil War was 6 years old. A 6-year-old child being forced to fight, a 6-year-old child being forced to kill. In fact, rebel armies in Liberia, that was their strongest fighting force for them. Because essentially with a child, unlike an adult, and I'm sure probably the adult soldiers who are here, most adults, I'd hope all adults, have developed this sense of right and wrong, of life and death. A child hasn't developed that sense yet. And so what they're capable of doing, and the fierceness of the war, or the killings that they're able to commit, and the atrocities that they're able to commit, is far more vicious than adult soldiers. In fact, in Liberia, adults, when they saw adult rebels, they would be happy to go to them. When you saw the child soldiers at a checkpoint, you freaked out because you could never tell what would piss them off. And they'd get pissed off pretty easily. But the idea or the process of rehabilitating these young people later on is probably one of the most difficult things in the world. I mean, it is extremely, extremely difficult in my work of trying to go through and work with these young people. Nothing could prove harder. And I want to wrap up, but unfortunately, we have this situation where there are so many countries, because you guys, and I remember when I first came to the U.S. in '98, and I went to high school in the U.S., and two things happened. First of all, I was coming from Africa, in an African country, and my friends in high school, I went to a school in Delaware. My friends in high school, first of all, a lot of them were like, oh wait, this guy's coming from Africa. He must have been living in the trees, and he must have been fighting the lions. I'm the skinniest guy. If I stand before a lion, even if it winks at me, I'm going to fall apart. So that wasn't happening. But there was first that misconception of the continent. But then coming to the U.S. and realizing that so many young people simply were not aware of the things that were happening. And the involvement that they could play in making change happen. I think one of the panelists rightfully said, people want to know how to get involved. And what I've seen all of the time that I've been here and in all of my work is that changing the world is no longer about governments. It's not about the UN. It's not about the big international organizations. I truly believe that the change in the world will come when we as individuals, when people, especially young people, because everywhere in the world we make up a majority of the population, but if we as young people stood up and we fought. Not with guns, but we fought intellectually and with our determination and strength, the world would flip around. Imagine if tomorrow morning every young person everywhere in the world stood up and they said no to child soldiers, no to war. I mean, we just stood up against it. Do you know what would happen? I bet all the money that I have, and it's not a lot of money, but I bet you the day after, the world would be a different and better place. We can do it. We just have to get up and stand up and find something, anything to do to make the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. Manis, before you share your story, I just want to note, and I've spoken with so many of you, and Ed, and over these past days, Brian and Hugh, and many of you in the audience here who are here with a story and have been telling your stories throughout the week. It is so powerful. And to take note that this is one of those ways that combines healing and education and actually being together in ways that help us create something that's very different. Thank you, Kemi. Manis?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I'll also like to bring 3 scenarios that I confronted in my region in South Asia. Well, today South Asia is one of the hotbeds of conflict, and every country in South Asia is grappled with some kind of conflict, either among themselves or within itself. Well, these 3 scenarios are a bit pessimistic, but later on I'm going to talk about optimistic hope as well. Well, the first scenario is about stealing the life of children. And this encounter happened to me in Afghanistan when I went there with UNICEF. And I was visiting one of the orphanages there. And there was this child who was not being able to really make friendship with other children. So he was a kind of a trouble. And the person who's managing the orphanage was in a dilemma on how to settle this issue, because he always beats the other children out there, and he has this hatred language, speaking in Arabic, all the words about jihad and everything. And then I asked the manager of the orphanage about where this child come from, and then he gave me this scenario of telling me that in Afghanistan and Pakistan there are some, I mean not all, but some of the radical madrasas, or so-called religious school, where children are prepared to be a suicide bombers. And this is one child which particularly was rescued from there and was put into that orphanage. So this is a scenario of a stealing of a life of a person, of children. So this is the first scenario. I'm not going to detail on this story. The second incident that happened to me was in Nepal. I was working with Save the Children and UNICEF because we recently had a peace process, and we almost have to settle about 19,000 soldiers who are called the People's Liberation Army, or the rebel soldiers. And among them, almost 70% of them are youth and children. So imagine 70% of these people, and Kimi just mentioned them in the case of Liberia as well. So in Nepal is also the same case. And we are dumping this 19,000 people in a cantonment, which is monitored by UN, giving them less than $50 a month for their living and everything. And this particular incident happened to me when I was interviewing one of the children who is now labeled as a minor soldier, and which I'm helping the UNICEF to discharge him from the cantonment site. And then I was interviewing this guy who has just been discharged, and I asked him, what are you going to do now? And he answered me, well, I don't have any future. Because if I go back to my society, nobody will accept me, because I was the cause. I'm the cause of the death of my parents, of the death of my family members, and the death of my neighbors. So this is a story of, stealing the hope from the children. So a different story where we really, not stealing the hope, but stealing the future. So this is a story where this children is not really seeing the future of himself. The third story happened to me when I was in Sri Lanka. I was there because we have a partner university where we are imparting peace education in Sri Lanka. And this story happened to me right on the day when Prabhakaran, the head of LTT, was found dead. And there was a big fanfare in the streets of Colombo when I was just landing in Colombo, and it was a big fanfare. A lot of food's been distributed. There were a fanfare of people coming on the streets and singing the victory songs and everything happening. And at the same time, on the other aisle, there were Tamils who were being dead because of the war, because of the Sri Lankan operation among Tamil people. And I was at the airport waiting for a taxi, and unfortunately or fortunately, I was sharing this taxi with a couple and a child who was just flying over from Tamil Nadu of India to Sri Lanka. And these were the Sinhala couple who used to work in Tamil Nadu in some schools there. And by some reason I was talking to this child because he was just sitting in my lap, and then I was just asking her a question. So why are you happy today? And the answer really struck me, and she was telling me like, we killed the Tamils, so that's why like she's happy. So here we're really stealing the hope of a child, because from that point onwards I was thinking like, where does the reconciliation happens between the Tamils and Silana, when from the child we're teaching about us and them. So these are the three different stories happen in my region with different scenarios, but a very pessimistic picture about like how we're going to deal with these kind of things. In one story we're talking about stealing the life of a child, because I don't know what is going to be the future of this child who is prepared to be a suicide bomber. On the other story, we're talking about this child who has been a child soldier and who cannot really go back to his society and who doesn't see the future. And the third story is about a child who really do not know about anything, but through the socialization process, through her family members, through media, through her society and culture, she has a bias among the other people whom she has to live forever. So for me, I think the only solution to this is education. I think this in the morning panel we talked about education. But with the education there is a problem. Well, I can cite two different examples from my region itself. One example is from Afghanistan. I was doing a research on looking at the educational patterns in Afghanistan at different era. So I came to know that right after 9/11 in 2002, UNICEF wasted almost $2 million on a dustbin. They just have to, they printed the textbook and they have to throw all the textbook. There was a serious blunder, and this $2 million went into dustbin. The reason was because education is seen as a public good, and every country who emerges from a post-conflict scenario, the first thing they want to instill is education. And this exactly happened in Afghanistan as well. And the UNICEF at that time decided to reprint all the textbook which had been used during after this the war with Soviet Union. So in that textbook, there were some languages, some hatred languages, which were projected towards the Soviets. And I seen some of the text as well. And in mathematics, they have these pictures of guns and bombs where they used to count the numbers. So this kind of textbooks were used. And then when the Taliban came, it was a different kind of textbooks. So sometimes education is also very political land. So there is some problem with education as well. A very funny story happened to me when I was recently in a trip to Bangladesh, where they were trying to change the text of the history book. But this morning I heard about a panelist was talking about if we had a woman, this world would be peaceful. But I didn't really see that in Bangladesh, because there is two powerful women in Bangladesh. In fact, in South Asia we have so many powerful women. In India we have Sonia Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, who run the show. In Pakistan we had Benazir Bhutto, and in Bangladesh we have Sheikh Hasina and the other lady, I forgot her name. But they were changing the textbook, and I was asking some of the people there, why are you changing the textbook? And then they told me, like, well, this happens every year. It happens when the other lady comes and she tries to project the history based on her family contribution in making the state of Bangladesh. You know? So sometimes education is also a problem. But I think my hope is on peace education, which is the real tool where we can bring some changes, where we can instill some hope to these people, to this kind of scenario. I'd like to quote a statement from the preamble of UNESCO, which states that since war begins in the minds of the men, it is in the minds of the men the defense of peace must be constructed. And I think that is the hope.
Thank you, Manish. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your stories. And as I'm aware of the time, and we are going until 4:15, and I'm aware that we all wanted to hear these stories, I'd like to take it one more step before we open it up for just a few questions to the panel. And Kimmy, you brought up a good point about rehabilitation and how difficult that is. How do we rehabilitate and or educate the children who have actually experienced being child soldiers in order to empower them to engage positively? And I don't want to stop with that question, and mainly because of the time. So I'm going to lay that contextually out here, knowing that that is such a serious problem, knowing that Greg Mortensen is doing work. Many of you have probably read 3 Cups of Tea. He's building schools for girls in Afghanistan, Pakistan, knowing the work that all of you are doing on the panel, the global campaign for peace education. We could go on, so many good things happening. Tell us, from your perspective, in the midst of this all systems breakdown, all over the planet, where is the all systems breakthrough? What's working? What is it that if we were to focus on more of that in this emergent worldview of cooperation and really working together, as so many of you have commented on, that we could indeed not just rehabilitate and empower, but actually proactively educate for peace an entire generation? Talk to us about that.
Oh, can I?
Please, Kimmy.
Manish said something that is so true in so many countries. First of all, the simple thing is listening to the people themselves. And Manish said something that is happening in so many post-war countries, that the big agencies are wasting a hell of a lot of money doing crazy things that sometimes I hear about, and you know, I'm a peace activist, but I want to find someone and knock them on the head. In the case of Liberia, there were young people who had fought from 1990. The war formally ended in 2004, okay? And these child soldiers, a lot of them were taking into these, and millions of dollars. In fact, the first disarmament was in 1997. Millions of dollars in UN funds. And what these guys did was they went out and they collected the child soldiers, and they said they had this fund for rehabilitation, reintegration, etc. And instead of going through doing a formal program or a series of programs, they went out and started giving each of the child soldiers $150 until they depleted the trust funds. Okay, now think about it. I'm a child soldier. I've just been holding guns. I've just been looting and stealing and pillaging, and someone hands me $150. Jeez. They went out and they bought sneakers and jeans and new CD players, okay? And then, but someone had to write a report saying that the reintegration rehabilitation process was complete. Obviously, it wasn't. They came back again in 2004. They took the child soldiers, they put them in a room, and this is true story. And their 5-day rehabilitation process, for a lot of them, were essentially having them watch war movies. That was what the experts said was the solution for rehabilitating Liberia's child soldiers. Now, it doesn't make sense, but these are the guys coming from Princeton and Harvard. Now, nothing against Princeton and Harvard. But if people listen, and if people spend more time listening to the people themselves, listening to the child soldiers, because often we make the mistake, especially the large aid agencies and stuff like that, of assuming we know what is right and what the people need. But if we actually went there and pretended, or not pretended, but we went with a perspective that we know absolutely nothing, and listen we would do so much more and so much better. And that's the premise of my work at Youth Action, that we go to the villages and we go to the town and we listen to the people before we develop the programs.
In my book, go to the people, live with the people, listen to the people, learn from what they are doing, and build with them.
Yes.
What I do with my people theater is I go to the people, I live their life, I let them narrate their story through improvisation. We raise issues that are not my issue. As a university professor here or in Yaoundé, I mean, my problem, my word is different from the word of somebody in the village. But if I go and listen, we think that education is simply go to sit in a classroom and get knowledge. Knowledge can be given informally, and all of us here, we can do it. If we go and live with the people, listen to their story. If there's a problem, we don't say, okay, you have a problem there. No. Let them say, this is the problem. And then you simply ask them, how do you solve your problem? And at that moment, if it's a monetary, it's a help, if bringing ideas, you can come in that moment. So that's how I do believe it is. And as I say, I am doing it, and I think it's the best way of educating people.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Doho. Roger, I know you want to say something also, and then we'll open it up for a couple of questions.
I went to a school in Nederburg, South Africa, and these children had two kinds of war. They were left over from the apartheid government, where Nelson Mandela eventually became president, and during that uprising, but they're also undergoing an incredible war of crime. And I visited with the Principal Daniels, and the first thing Principal Daniels did when he went to this school, it was his first day assigned to the school, and he began to find out why he was assigned here. Bullet holes started coming through the classrooms after about 10 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and he had no idea what was going on. His first lesson was to teach the children how to hide on the floor when the bullets came through. Secondly, he noticed there were over 400 bullet holes in this school. Now, this is 600 elementary kids from kindergarten through 8th grade. He discovered that the bullet holes were from 6 rival gangs that had been fighting each other for over 40 years. And they fought for the property of the school, for their territory, because they could use these children for drugs and prostitution. And the oldest was, 10, 11 years old. The second thing Mr. Daniels did was patch up 400 bullet holes in the school, and then, being courageous as he was, he went out to meet the gangs and had a meeting with them and said, why are you shooting through the school? What is this? And he said, the unemployment rate in Nederburg is 70%. We rob and we steal, or we starve to death. This has been a 40-year tradition. We don't have any choice. And Principal Daniels thought for a minute, and he said, look out at the front of this school. There are several acres there that are just lying dormant. Plant a farm, grow crops, sell them on a roadside stand. Well, this sounds kind of preposterous as us thinking about this here, but they did. And it's called the Peace Garden. And the city of Nederburg supplied them with water, the gangsters with water, on the understanding they swept the streets at night with hand brooms. And they agreed. And they have enough money selling vegetables to support every member of all 6 gangs and their families. There hasn't been a shot fired in Nederburg Elementary School since 2004. Now, the value that comes out of this is always respect the dignity of your enemies. Most politicians nowadays don't do this, but Principal Daniels had an enemy. 6 gangs putting bullet holes through these windows of the children. He respected their dignity, he maintained their dignity, he worked with them, and it ended up on national television in South Africa, because here's someone who reduced the crime rate, solved a problem, created peace, maintained the dignity of everyone, and was able to continue with the education of the children. So education is very important, and solving the problems peacefully like that is the only way we're going to do it.
Thank you. Any other comments from the panelists before we go to, in all honesty, we're only going to have time for 2 or 3 questions. So in all fairness and no pushing and shoving, it's a peace summit here. But really, just 2 or 3 comments, questions. Please, yes, of course. And why don't you just step right up, and if you have a comment or question, and please share your name.
Hi, my name's Nadia. I'm from Montessori High School, and I was just wondering, like, just your opinion on how they project children and being in wars, because during my freshman year I did studies on Sierra Leone and Liberia and the children, and I think, in my opinion, they blind us as children in education about what happens in other countries, because I think, in my opinion, that countries think that they're better than other countries and don't believe that their students and their education system should know about these problems. But if we know about them, we can take those small steps to make bigger steps. And like most of you have organizations which have made big impacts, which started with little steps. So I just was wondering, what are your thoughts on why do you think they do that, to blind other countries and their students and their education systems from things of this matter? And they think they're really small, but they're really not. They're really huge.
That's such a good question. And I don't like to be seen as someone who's a conspiracy theorist. But I'd like to believe that if, again, something as simple as the Millennium Development Goals, which is supposed to be the plan for ending extreme poverty, there's a survey that showed that less than 1% of Americans knew about the Millennium Development Goals, okay? And that's supposed to be what ends human suffering. And around the world, it seems to me, if every young person was informed not only about the issues, but about the real possibilities for change, that it's actually not a utopian dream, but it's possible. And I'll give you one simple example: education. 640 million children not in school. They want to go to school, can't go to school because they don't afford it. So you and I are like, how are we going to pay for that? The UN says it costs $6 billion a year to send up those children to school. We can't find the $6 billion in the world. But guess how much we spend on perfumes in the world every year? $12 billion. We spend more on perfumes than what it would take to send 640 million children to school. So that tells us if we really wanted to bring change, we could do it. The willpower isn't there. The force of young people isn't there because we're not being informed. The other thing I want to say quickly, because I don't want to hold too much time, is that there's both sides of it. Okay, you will see the poverty and the human suffering and the degradation in Africa and other parts of the world, but on the other side of it, even in these communities, a day after war, there's so much hope. There's so much happiness. As you saw in the film, those children were trying to play, even though there were gunshots happening right there. But the humanity, I think someone said it this morning, the humanity is in all of us, even under the worst situation, especially for children. And we just have to find that, and we just have to support it.
I think it. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I think it has to do with how the message is delivered as well. I think is my mic on this time?
It is.
Okay. I think it's so easy, especially in this country. We like to politicize things. We like to pick right and wrong, black and white, red and blue, and it's so easily, that message can so easily become that, and it sells better when it's the tragic story. You know, if it bleeds, it leads, and we need to make sure that the message that we send does have hope. I mean, if you look at my film, one of the things that I try to do, it's a tragic story, but here are some people doing things to make it better. I think it's important that you can make that connection, because we don't live in our hearts don't want to live in tragedy, they want to live in hope. So I think it's important that we make that connection so that, one, we don't politicize it, and two, we provide hope.
I think one of the things I'd like to highlight is, apart from education, I think media also plays a very important role in this. And especially when I come to America, I really do not like the media here. And I was lecturing once at McGill University in Montreal to a bunch of people who were going to be journalists, and I challenged them, like, how much media is used in Nepal in terms of giving information. If you go to every rural village of Nepal, everybody has radio. And what they're listening is BBC. So I challenged them, like, they can even tell the name of the Prime Minister of Canada if you ask these people. So, so how media, plays is also a kind of a big difference in terms of educating.
Thank you, and thank you for the question.
I stand before you very humbly and pitifully as a human being.
Your name, please.
I am P.C. Craig Herbig, U.S. Marines retired. I want to thank all the distinguished panelists, the moderator, for all that they're doing here. Points of interest for myself on the knowledge of spiritual connection through the children and the healing of the soul through education. I just got done with a full catharsism after doing just one of the poems of the Vietnam Children's Art Project. My question to each of the panelists and to the moderator: the Native American sacred ways, which I'm very honored to have my brothers here from the Flathead Indian Reservation through Soldier's Heart organization, Dr. Tick. The Native American sacred ways and the first peoples of this country, I see nowhere represented here in panel discussions, okay? I'm very, very honored to have sharings from my sister, if I may call her that with great honor, for the issues she brought up, the very issues of it's now time for the women to step up and take back their rightful place at the head of their nations, to educate the children, okay? The sacred ways of the indigenous people of this country, such as Ogichida, the Sacred Warrior Society of Peace, the Sacred Sundance, the Sacred Ghost Dance, sadly enough, which is still illegal in this country. A country of freedom, I have my doubts. The Sacred Sweat Lodge, the Sacred Talking Circle that my brother Bear held here at this gathering. The phenomenal works that Dr. Tick and Soldier's Heart organization does dealing with combat veterans and their PTSD, not PTSD, but post-soul, terror soul disorder in his book War in the Soul, along with many other of his works such as Dream Healing, or the works of a phenomenal lady in her book entitled Sacred Message Down Under.
Thank you. And as you're sharing these, is it a question you would like to pose
Yes,
to the
there
panel?
is.
Okay, thank you.
There's one more book I'd like to share with, and that's somewhat slanted, I feel. It's entitled On Killing by Lieutenant Colonel Grossman. We listen, but why can't we listen to the children? The people who really get it. The little grandmothers and grandfathers. Okay? So to restate the question, how can we in this country best do, to quote Soldier's Heart message, caring means sharing the burden. Magwitch, and Semper Fi.
Thank
Why
you.
aren't there?
Thank you. And I'm going to ask that the panel hold that question and ask you please to step up to the mic and ask your question, and then we'll get final comments from the panel.
Hi, my name is Sheila Sengupta. I'm a master's student here at Case Western Reserve University. My question for you is, what has been your biggest obstacle in conveying these messages, and what have you come across as, maybe if it's ignorance or just lack of knowledge in regards to child soldiers? What has been your biggest issue in conveying this information? Thank you.
Well,
Dr. Doho.
let me start by saying that we have to start doing something. I mean, we've already been doing things, maybe we don't know what is happening. When I watch the poem and the painting of the children, Vietnamese and on, I had tears all around, because their story, the story of these kids bombing on women, the trigger, I saw my mothers and uncles being bombed and so on. So we have to connect with one another, and we hope that the Inamori Center has a list that we don't only come and listen to one another. Let's connect. There should be a list so that when we finish at the end, it's not just finish like this. We have to keep on, because you can never. Let me just quickly and say, I wanted to take Sheikha had as children with my Susan, wanted to take them to Africa so that they see the reality, but we were opposed by the administration. All right, but we keep on working, in order to do that. With my colleagues here, you connect and then you try, and person to person, you can be able to change your personal life. Yeah. Don't let the structure which are there prevent you from doing here. I'm so happy because almost every summer I had students going back and living with my people. Guess what? They come back with tattoos. They're so happy and so on and change. So that is it. So what are the obstacles? You're talking about child soldier and so on. The first obstacle is that it's not always easy when you've been at the center of all these things. I mean, there's some shame on all those things. So we just have to encourage one another in order to talk. Guess what? I had one student chewing the chewing-gum in Albany, looking at me and say, "Oh, so you were a child soldier? Did you kill? Did you smoke weed?" So all these questions may prevent you from talking, but we have to learn how to connect. Let me just finish. You cannot change the world after we have gathered here and we don't know one another. Do you know who is sitting next to you? No. Look at the person, take the note so that we have it later on, so that the dialogue continue after we have finished here.
Thank you. Thank you. What beautiful wrap-up, Professor Doho. And I see Dr. Shannon French nodding her head in the back, and I invite all of you, as we wrap this up, and share that there are many young heroes of peace, and there are many heroes of peace who understand that if we want a new future, we need a new story. Turn to the person next to you. Introduce yourselves. But first, please help me thank the panel.